does it mean when we read many times of the ancients being gathered to their fathers when they die? Does this mean more than the cemetery? Well, let's look at a few words that we have used to suggest places where tradition has believed that people go when they die. The word heaven, although having more than one Hebrew word translated as such, is used some 318 times in the King James. Never once is a human being spoken of as going there at death, or ever for that matter. The closest we get to such an idea is in Proverbs 30, verse 4, where we read, "Who has gone up to heaven and come down?" This might ring a few bells in people's minds. The Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 7 to 10 alludes to this quote from Proverbs to define the unique nature of Jesus Christ, who has been resurrected from the grave and ascended to heaven, to come again one day. The King James uses the word hell, here's another place, or Sheol, some 31 times throughout the Old Testament, so maybe here we're in luck in supposing that people go somewhere consciously at the point of death in the Old Testament. Never once in my NIV does the Old Testament use the word hell, which is quite interesting. Why is that? The NIV and modern translations don't use the term hell as the King James does, because they rightly translate Sheol, the Hebrew word that the King James has translated as hell. The modern translations, such as my NIV, rightly translate Sheol as the grave. On this point, the King James is somewhat misleading because of the preconceived ideas or traditions that are attached to the word hell. Traditional notions are powerful and very difficult to overturn in people's minds, even though all the evidence might be brought to bear on the subject. When God said, "The day you eat of it, you will surely die," in Genesis chapter 2, verse 17, the reason that Adam and Eve did not return to the dust from which they were formed was not because God meant spiritual death, as some traditional views have argued, in the sense that the human spirit was no longer connected to God, as I said, as some have tried to argue. This is simply nonsense. Adam and Eve did not die that very day, even though they should have, which meant they would have ceased to exist and returned to the dust, because as the original act of God's grace, He sacrificed innocent animals, put them to death, returned them to the dust of the earth as a substitute, or as that life which stood in the place of Adam and Eve, in order to spare them from the penalty of death for sin, in order that they might perpetuate the human race and fill the earth, so that God, in His sovereignty, could work out His grand plan of redemption through humanity. This is a most wonderful plan, that God should extend grace and make provision in the form of a substitute for the human race, even though He was deadly serious that they should die that very day. God is serious about sin, and He's serious about death as the end of life. Why did God do this? He did it in order to cover their nakedness, Adam and Eve's, so that He could work out this great plan. The fact that Jesus Christ Himself followed this original pattern of becoming an innocent sacrifice for humanity is significant in light of the approach of Easter, and in plumbing the real significance of the empty tomb. But the significance of the empty tomb can only really be plumbed and appreciated if we have a very real biblical understanding of death, what it means to die, before we can appreciate God's answer to that.